world according to Garp and East of Eden. And if money were no object, he would become an archaeologist and spend the rest of his life digging up stuff. Which I was thinking, how cool is that? I remember as a young person being so fascinated with Egyptian, and the King Tut exhibit had come by, and then Pompeii.
I can see him on the camel.
Exactly. So my understanding, and I believe it's right up here for you to see, is that the title of Brady's speech is Freedom versus Security, Past, Present, and Our Dangerous Future, and that's part of why I thought it was germane, that question about tradition versus tradition holding progress back. And Brady's speech will be up to 15 minutes, or 13 to 15 minutes. So.
So get him, Brady.
Okay, everyone. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, no guests. Before I start, I want to call out, this is not the speech I intended to give today. It's been no secret. I have a brother who's getting married in 2 months. I am at a 0 when it comes to best man speech. I thought by signing up for this, I'd be able to pressure myself in formulating thoughts. Didn't work that way. So,
Not yet.
not yet, yes. So I intend to, in the near future, reveal this best man speech, and I desperately need your help making it something that we can actually do. But today, yesterday I was really struggling to figure out what I wanted to talk about, and this topic sort of came to me because it's basically something I'm obsessed with. I think there's a lot of things that we're going to explore during this conversation. By the way, I am not an expert on any of these topics, okay? My goal here is to, is it a clicker?
It's working.
Oh shit, pardon me. Excuse me, sorry.
Where is that on the,
I'm so sorry, so sorry.
I'll note
Did
that.
not curse, did not mean to curse.
Brady said,
So the topic of my speech today is freedom versus security, past, present, and our dangerous future. As far as the agenda of this talk, I want to start with sort of rolling out an ancient debate. As long as there's been representative systems, this conflict between freedom and security has been a central tension of every one of those systems. As a means to explore this concept, we're going to take a little history of technology tour. It's going to be very narrow, and it's going to focus on some historical leaders that sort of represent an era and a moment that we can use to unpack some bigger things. Now, the central claim I'm going to make to you all today is some version of the above, which is historically there's been a clean relationship between technology and individual liberty. There's been sort of both tracks are moving at once. The more technology actually drives liberation. My feeling and why I'm motivated to give this talk is for the first time, that's about to change in a very substantial way. That will affect every one of our lives. So again, I'm not here to convince you of anything, but I do hope this conversation provokes some thoughts and exposes you to some things that are going on in the world that are very worth thinking about, okay? So, but first, let's establish some very key basic ideas. Freedom versus security has long been a core debate in democratic societies. If we look at this picture on the screen, first thing I want to call out, this is AI generated, live on minds, on spines, etc. So disregard that. But essentially this is an overview. Freedom on one side, security on another, there's a tension, right? The more free you are, in some ways the less secure the system is. A perfect example of this is the American Second Amendment, which states a well-regulated militia being necessary for a free state, being necessary to the existence of a free state, the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. We all know that. A lot of people don't know the first preamble of that amendment, that it's conditional based off of a free system and a militia. But we know historically the Second Amendment has been curtailed in all sorts of ways. The right to arms doesn't mean you and I can have a nuke, right? There's certain limitations on that, right? That's a perfect example of the tension between an absolute freedom and the considerations of society broadly, right? Now, again, this tension has been long-standing. everyone probably has seen some version of this quote. It's credited to Benjamin Franklin, but it's essentially like, those who would give up freedom for security deserve neither, right? Classic debate, classic quote. So in essence, this whole question of security and freedom is a trade-off, and it's highly contingent on the context in which the debate is happening. So again, teaser, I think the context of this debate is taking a dramatic shift right now in our lifetimes. So there are a lot of areas of consensus around this debate. One of the things I want you to think about is this idea that as technology has driven modernity itself, it has also been a mechanism to liberalize societies. And I mean liberalism in a very small L, not a political sense. And we're gonna talk a little bit about how this works, but how we're gonna do that is first, I'm gonna establish these two ideas. The state is something we're gonna talk about, and technology is something we're gonna talk about. The state, this definition of the state is from Max Weber, and it says, the state is an institution that maintains a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence within an area, right? Simple. And technology is the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes in life and industry. One thing I think we should know and understand about technology is it's not necessarily just tech. It's also organizational tech, right? It's systems of organization of people, not just consumer goods or hard tech. So this is all a bunch of things I'm saying at you, right? But I wanna kind of start to unpack this idea with some very specific examples that by the end, I think will show a trend, which again, I'm gonna show you, I think is about to end. Alexander the Great. You've heard of this guy? So Alexander the Great is one of the most famous Western military leaders in the canon. He lived from 356 BC to 323 BC. At the time, at the peak of his power, he fielded an army of only 40,000 troops. That army was backed by a supply chain of roughly 60,000 civilians. Do we all understand what a supply chain is in this context, in logistics? It just simply means like, if we were gonna go on a camping trip, what's the stuff we need? And if we're going on a camping trip for one day, you might need one level of things. If you're going on a camping trip for a year, you might need another level of things. So think about supply chains and logistics in that context, the material that's required to achieve X, Y, or Z. Alexander the Great conquered 2 million square miles. And some key advantages that allowed him to do this were specific metallurgy and organization. So the big idea here is that imagine this area today. We've got Greece, Macedon, Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, large parts of India, etc., and so on and so forth. You could never imagine 40,000 people taking and holding that ground, right? In our modern era. So in 330 BC, when Alexander lived, populations were small, state capacity was limited, and as a result, the ability or the things needed to exert political power over a geography were really relatively small. I don't know why I'm getting that way. Yeah. Let's get a applause, okay?
Yeah.
Alexander, everyone. All right, now let's jump way ahead in the future, all right? Napoleon Bonaparte. Wow, that's like 2,000 years ahead, all right? Now, before we talk about this, let's look at the numbers. So he existed from this period of time. His army size was about 800,000 strong at its peak. And then, as far as the total area he covered, thank you, Patrice, was 2.5 million square miles. Not that different than Alexander. But recognize these numbers are very different, okay? Now, when we talk about Napoleon's key advantages, one is this idea of genius, all right? And that's an amorphic thing that we're gonna talk about. But the real things were organizational technology and gunpowder. So, before we go into this in more specifics, I want to take a little detour because gunpowder is a critical thing that's going to color a lot of the argument that I'm making. So, gunpowder revolutionized militaries and states alike, right? Think about medieval Europe, like what that looked like. These were feudal kingdoms, small states. Militaries were peasants and knights were heavily armored, heavily trained. So those forces dominated the political space in Europe. But when gunpowder comes along, suddenly, an untrained peasant can knock that knight off his horse, and it totally changes everything. But, and this is the big but, and this is, I think, the core tension. And I'm just going to read this verbatim. Gunpowder required complicated organizational systems in order to establish a supply chain that could field an amount of guns that make a difference on a battlefield. So, what does that mean, like, specifically? If a society was going to take advantage of this new tech, it required society to modernize in a lot of ways. So you can see how the drive of modernity, technology, actually the push of weapons tech pushed state capacity to grow. Now let's go back to Napoleon. Before Napoleon was born, France had had gunpowder for hundreds of years. And as a result, France was able to develop state capacity that didn't have before. And state capacity can be defined in a lot of different ways. But, they had the ability to field a professional army, right? Permanent logistics, fortifications, financial systems. All of this is new as a product of gunpowder and the need to harness it to achieve political power. So why do I bring this up? Because Napoleon's genius doesn't exist without all this other stuff, right? And we can talk more about what that is or isn't, but for today's purposes, keep it moving. Now, finally, let's jump way ahead again. This is the American military posture at the end of World War II. So, Dwight D. Eisenhower was the commander of American forces in Europe. During the war period, the Army swelled to 12.5 million. The supply chain swelled to 25 million, and obviously huge amounts of territory. So what I hope this shows is that these numbers, think about the organization you need to put these types of forces not only into the field, but to supply them. So this is the trend, right? As modernity's happened, it's created some bigger trends. So what these three examples, I hope, show, in my very weirdly nervous attempt to communicate it, is that new technology works in conjunction with state capacity. They're hand in glove. Can't have one without the other. And these three trends reveal these three examples reveal the clear trend. And that is, in order for a polity, or an elite within a polity, to access new and deadlier military capability, they also needed societies to successfully, they needed to develop the capacity to manage more and more people and organize them, right? So put in a very different way, tech creates power, but it demands state infrastructure. It creates its own demand. So more tech equals more civil society, equals more rights. That is one way you can think about, and very hackneyed, and there's so many ways you can think about it. But that's one way you can think about the development of our modern civil rights societies. And key idea here, there's no Alexanders in 1945. These technological systems, to harness them, required complicated concert and coordination around huge groups, not like Alexander with 40 10. So, I posit that with many examples that push against this trend, what we call modernity has remained relatively static, and so too has the debate around security and freedom. I'm old enough to remember the Iraq War. I'm old enough to remember the debates around wireless wiretapping, those type of things. But, those things were challenges, but not like on a systemic level. So, this is where everything's been heading. Okay, guys? I think everything's about to change. I think it may already have happened, and we just don't know it yet. And I think the implications of this change are going to be pretty significant for this debate about what's the proper relationship between security and freedom moving forward. So, good question.
Yeah.
Interesting question. It's a lot of conjecture so far, but there's a reason why I think these things, right? This is one way to think about it. Every generation I think, feels that they live on the edge of history and they're about to fall off. We have, like, every generation has a doomsday cult, or, you know, Jesus is coming in my lifetime, whatever it may be. So we have to consider that whenever we think about whenever these concerns enter our own brain, right? We have to argue against ourselves and say, of course everyone sensationalizes their time, right? Our time's the end time, right? And that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that there's been a fundamental change in the relationship between individuals and tech. And that change is moved beyond liberation, and it's created systemic risk on an individual level. These are 3 texts that are out there that I think are interesting to consider in this light: AI, 3D printing, and of course drones. A lot of you people might say, I'm not scared of no drones, right? A lot of people say that. And if you follow the military circles, there's a bias in the West for expensive big platforms. The American government doesn't want to hear this argument. But let me just read this quote to you. Drones represent not just a new weapon, but a tectonic shift in how power is projected, warfare is conducted, and security is maintained. They blur the lines between the civilian and the combatant, between peace and conflict, and between state and non-state power. Their rise destabilizes old hierarchies, economic, military, and political, forcing them, even the most powerful nations, to rethink what it means to be secure in the modern era. So, quickly, we're going to jump into Ukraine and Russia, right? When the war started, if you look at the casualty numbers, artillery, small arms, missiles. In the year 2025, drones responsible for 80% of every casualty on the battlefield. Artillery was the whole basis for the Russian war machine prior. It's not effective at this point. And a nice anecdote I saw, there was a NATO meeting recently, and the Ukrainian general that heads their drone command was asked about NATO security. And he said, it would take 4 drones to take them down. I am over the red, so I gotta tell you guys some really quick things. Drones massively stabilize everything, okay? And there's some key buckets here that I wanna talk through. Cost effectiveness, you see this. In Ukraine today, drones cost about $1,000. And they're destroying machines that cost $30 million. They're being shot down by missiles that cost $1.5 million. Scalability, the drone technology is commercial. You can go to Best Buy and buy a military grade drone in today's era. You can manufacture them locally, etc. It really lowers the barrier for non-state actors to enter political combat. Here's 3 examples. ISIS has been using drones to drop grenades on police in Mexico. Mexican cartels have been using drones to attack police convoys. And Hezbollah recently flew surveillance attack drones into Israel, right? So there's a lot more I want to say about this, but given the time allotment, I want to move forward. But before I do, when you think about the emergence of drones, the low barrier to entry, low cost, when you think about AI, you think about 3D printing, and then you next think about Max Weber's definition of a state. A state is something that monopolizes the legitimate use of violence within a territory. Interesting. So to summarize very briefly, technology liberates, but it also destabilizes, right? Traditionally, technology has required more complicated human systems in order to unlock the benefit. However, we're living in a moment where emerging breakthroughs are fundamentally adjusting that calculus. For the first time, humans can challenge the state itself on an individual level. And obviously that undermines all the systems that we take for granted, including representative government. So in the near future, my fear is the Alexanders will be unleashed again, because they can. So the new challenge here, defenders of representative democracy, we gotta come together, we gotta update these ideas. We have to think it through what security and freedom means in 2025, and we have to find a way to secure both.
to be here or there. In just a moment, it looks like you're getting ready.